Louise, warm welcome to Startup Grind Hong Kong.
Thanks, Jens. Really lovely being here.
Hope you're doing good.
All good and hello everyone from Australia.
Great. Before we start kind of looking into advisory boards and how to think creatively, can you make a short introduction of yourself?
For sure. The Advisory Board Centre is the global professional body for the advisory board sector. So it's about best practice and ethical engagements for advisory boards. So we operate in about 20 countries and we have members globally that really dedicated to best practice in advisory boards as they build it into their portfolio. I started the Advisory Board Centre because I had an advisory board for my previous business in 2005 and it changed my life. We grew that business to 135 offices in 8 countries in 5 years. And when I sold that business, I was firstly very tired, number one. And number two, I was very grateful for what the advisory board had done for me personally, as well as for the business, that I've dedicated my life since to the professional development of the sector. So, Jens, this is what I do every day.
And as you said, for Advisory Board Center, you had a company called HR Coach International. You were in 8 countries. And maybe because that's a startup, it was a startup, and then you did an exit. Yeah. So maybe you can tell us a bit about the journey from the idea and how you expanded HR Coach International.
Well, it was really a bumpy ride to start with. So I started it because I love being in business and the corporate environment just really didn't suit me. So I saw the need for outsourced human resources to the small and medium-sized business sector. After doing it for about 2 years, I realised that there was a lot of opportunity to automate a lot of those processes. So we spent a year developing a software application for the first HR software for the small and medium-sized business sector in Australia. When we launched that in the market, I misjudged the go-to market strategy. So it took longer than what I had expected. Eventually, we ended up with thousands of businesses using that software, but right at that launch, it was tough going. I had to sell everything that I owned to keep the business going. And the following year, we were able to really ride that wave and then developed a model that would really scale the business. And at that point in time, so this was 2005, firstly, Jens, I had nothing left to sell. And I wanted to be confident and deliberate in the decisions that I was making as a business owner. And I was making decisions and I'm thinking, is that a good decision? I think it is. I really don't know. I'm going to go ahead. And I thought, that's not good enough. I wanted to be better than that. And I wanted to be confident, deliberate, and not change my mind once I make a decision that I'm really committed to it. So I thought, I need an advisory board around me. I didn't know what one was, but I thought I need good voices around me, people that I really deeply respected and trusted. To be able to support me as a sounding board. I would still make my own decisions, but I would have people that I really respected around me so that I really felt that I was held accountable to them and I would step up to be the best I could possibly be. And that's when that advisory board really supported us when we built out our strategy for global expansion.
Yeah, you used the word accountability because it's great to, there's no problem changing your mind when you build a company, but it's good to have somebody who you would explain why, so that, there might be less of a back and forth. So I really love that word accountability, to have somebody to say, what did you see this yesterday? So when you founded Advisory Board Center in 2012, I mean, apart from your own experience, what pain points did you see in the market?
Well, I saw that there were business owners like me that were isolated. The directors are being looked after by governance bodies like the Australian Institute of Directors, the Singapore Institute of Directors and their counterparts in other countries. And accountants and lawyers were being looked after, but no one was looking after the advisory board sector from a professional perspective. Fast forward that to the research that we've been doing now since 2019 to 2021, the advisory board sector grew over 52% in less than 2 years worldwide. And so that growth is an incredible opportunity, but it's problematic because businesses and organisations are using advisory boards, but it means a lot of people are sitting on advisory boards and they don't know what they're doing. And so having a foundation to what good looks like, the ethical frameworks of what an advisory board is there to do and not there to do, and ensuring that roles aren't blurred. It sounds really simple, but it's not. And so engaging advisory boards, when you see it in the market, before we existed as a professional body, there was no guidelines to the what good looks like.
And as you said, I mean, there were people taking care of directors, there were people taking care of accountants. Then you have the managers, and the advisory boards, of course, takes care of the manager of the company, being supportive body to that. And then by having the advisory board center and having the structure for that, you get a predictable, predictable support. So when when you started up, because we all like to talk about validation, how did you validate the idea of the advisory board center?
Well, first of all, I had the passion, right? So I had my own personal experience. There's nothing better than that, but it's not good enough when you build a sector. So 2012, I invested 5 years to research, test and validate the market, because my own experience is my experience, but what is it that is out there in the market? So I was testing advisory board structures in my own portfolio, number one. Number two was I was looking at advisory structures that were being adopted globally. And as part of that, I researched 430 consulting firms in 17 countries to look at where advice was being obtained and what the future advice would look like. And we could see by 2015, 2016 that democratisation of advice was here to stay. At the same time, I'd finished a study that I started in 2008 and finished it in 2016. And that was based on 26,000 employees and 607 businesses. And we looked at the things that employees complained the most about. And the number one complaint that employees had was meetings. So we're going to go out to market to talk about meetings, yet everybody hates meetings. That's problematic as well. And so what's the difference between a highly effective and impactful meeting versus those that aren't and are being valued by the organisation as well as people within the organisation itself. And so through that process, we found that there was no professional body in the world looking after the advisory board sector. It was also problematic in finding that a lot of people were sitting on advisory boards as a retirement strategy. Now, it's okay to sit on advisory boards at any stage of your career. It's not an ageist thing, but it's not a check-out thing. It's not something that you do once you've done everything else. Part of the role of an advisory board is to focus on what's next, to be problem solving, about being optimistic and about the blue sky of the future. But if you're only focusing on your experience from the past and not being up to date and current about the future, you're actually missing the point. Now, most organisations that 75% of organisations that have an advisory board, their number one priority for that advisory board is because they want to grow. A startup or a scale up or a mid-sized business, that is their key aim. So to focus on growth means that you need to be thinking differently about the future. And so all of that research really culminated into really understanding that there is a need, there is a market, there's actually a sector specifically for advisory boards that's different to governance boards, and it's also different to other professional service providers.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because the idea, and also for this event, is also how can you get additional, not just talent, additional ideas into your company and have them in a structured way. And as you said, people don't like meetings, but at the same time you have to meet to discuss things, and how do you organize that? I think you mentioned this at the start of it, but just to reiterate and make sure that the advisory board, how big is your company? How many advisors are out there that has taken some of your courses and learned and been certified?
Yeah, thank you. So operating from Australia, but a global organisation. So we have about 500 members that are all leaders in their field in their own right. And they make themselves available to sit on advisory boards as part of a portfolio approach. So those members are credentialed through chair certification. That is the credential. And from that, they have best practice methodologies to be able to implement inside organisations in their own sectors or in their own markets. And we choose less than 10% of those that apply to join us, Jen. So, you know, from the managing partner of Deloitte in Mexico to the CEO of Coca-Cola in Shanghai, the senior vice president of Unilever in Singapore, to the head of the Climate Change Authority in Australia. They're all quality people that are wanting to use their knowledge and expertise in new ways to be part of the thinking for the future. And so there's a high spirit of wanting to give back, not only be really good at what they do, but to be on advisory boards, you've got to be thinking and be thoughtful about someone else, because it's actually on an advisory board, it's not just about providing advice, it's mainly about the critical thinking that you do together and problem solving together. So the ability to be able to listen is more important than it is about telling somebody else what you think.
Yeah, and today, like, yes, this meeting, I mean, you're in Australia, I'm in Sweden, Eugenia's in Hong Kong, we are all over the world, and we do meet, and so you can basically, come back to that, create your advisory board with people from all over the world, and, you know, time zones, we can work with them as well. So before we move into the how to set up an advisory board, I want to talk a little bit about sort of the importance of ideas. And I like the idea, so when I kind of read up on this and we met, it's like with the collective thinking, like collective thinking helps people. But there's another phrase close to it, group thinking, which is basically the opposite. So can you tell us a little bit benefits of collective thinking and how to avoid group thinking?
Yeah, well, collective, an advisory board is a thinking system, right? And so you're there to think together. And then when you've got people from inside an organisation, a startup or a scale-up, from people who've got absolute skin in the game, then you have an independent chair to enable the people from within the organisation to sit back and receive advice and participate without trying to control the environment. And then having external advisors that are independent of each other with different backgrounds. You have a conversation that's never been had before, because people are independent of the organisation, but also independent of each other. And so you get a high level of intellectual honesty when you have people engaged in that conversation that have no other agenda other than the one that's sitting right in front of them. Now, groupthink is when you've got people thinking the same, talking the same, and then reaching the same conclusion. Now, we know the Bay of Pigs and all that sort of stuff, all of that, history's shown that people that are the same, you lose your filter. And so an advisory board is not a collective group of consultants. Just want to make that really clear. Advisory boards are there because of the way that they think, not to provide recommendations or to do the work for you, right? When you've got an advisory board, you've got to do the heavy lifting. You've got to be prepared to work even harder. I have an advisory board myself, as I should, and we've got our advisory board meeting next week. And I tell you, I work really hard to today and tonight and before here, getting ready for that meeting, because I want to be absolutely on my A game for them to provide feedback, because I know that I am in my own bubble in my business. And you can lose your way and miss things that's just really logical to somebody else that has the right experience with the right lens on what you're doing. So carefully choosing the advisors that are around you, but making sure that they're different. That way you can have a robust conversation. You know, when I have my advisory board meetings and my advisors start agreeing with each other, I tell them to stop it. I don't want you to agree. This is not a governance board. We don't need to vote. We don't need to reach consensus. I want you to fight this out for me and give me different points of view. So when I do make a decision, it's been really well thought out and considered.
Yeah, and I really like you said about bring your A game, and whenever as a founder, whenever you interact with a mentor or a coach, as an individual or as an advisory board, is bring your A game. They will give their A game back, and yeah. How, I mean, that's part of the sort of the culture of having an A game. So how do you set a good team culture?
Team culture internally?
Yeah, using an advisory board as sort of a maybe a lightning rod or sort of a guiding. So when you want to, you want people to be able to, as you said, speak up, not necessarily agree, because that's risky.
Yeah. So your advisory board can really set the tone for the rest of your organisation, because it's where your strategic thinking is really road tested. So advisory boards is a lot about road testing your ideas and thinking out loud, and not making decisions quickly. That's important. And so when you have an advisory board, you have a charter. And you're really clear about what is it that we're here to talk about and what is it we're here not to talk about. So having clarity around meetings so that there's a really clear objective. There are the specific things that you're working towards. You want your advisory boards to be working to something, and not just meeting for the sake of meeting, and you're just talking and there's no outcomes from it. When you get that right, that then filters through to the culture of the way meetings happen inside the organisation. As we said, that's the number one complaint for 26,000 employees is the culture of meetings. Now, could you imagine if you're able to get the meeting culture right and it filters through the way that other meetings are held internally, it filters down, but then it filters back up again. But in today's environment where people are talking about the war for talent and people not only employee retention, but recognition, but more importantly, the ability for employees to contribute, imagine internal meetings being able to reshape them into advisory board type functions. It actually creates a whole new lease of life about the way meetings are held and the results of meetings as well.
Oh yeah, I definitely like that, because that means you internally will have people who are able to contribute, and also you have, and as you said, an advisory board can be to grow the company, and you can have a separate advisory board for company culture. So there's no conflict in that, and you can get help. When it comes to let's go and look at the nuts and bolts of setting it up. We talked about what it is, but how difficult is it to set up an advisory board?
The answer to that, as is, and some things, it depends, right? And so if you're, it depends on the stage your business is at. And how complex or simple it is. The best practice is ensuring that there are certain principles being put in place so that you've got some ethical frameworks around it. Doesn't make it difficult, but having the principles in place is relevant for whatever size your business is and whatever purpose your advisory board is. So if you've got clarity of scope, you've got structure and discipline, you've got measurement of impact, you've got people who are independent as well as people selected because they're fit for purpose. If you get those principles right, then the structure or the framework that you put in place is then you can really clearly think through the different options of how to establish an advisory board. The establishment phase is the most important part of the advisory board, which is really interesting. People think it's the meetings themselves, but it's if you get the purpose right and then you get the cadence of the meetings and the objectives right, then everybody knows and are really clear about what you're there to do and what you're there not to do. To establish an advisory board for the business market, which is the mid-market, so for instance in Australia that might be businesses with revenue between $1.5 to $100 million, and it's an existing business, they will take generally 3 months to establish the advisory board, half a day a month for 3 months, and that really helps them to really check their existing culture, their existing governance frameworks, and then bringing on the right people in the right structure. For a startup or a scale-up, it may be more of a starts informally and moves formally. So pop-up advisory boards, for instance, is a common structure for startups where you might have an advisory board of one, and then you bring the advisors in as you need them. It's a very cost-effective way to do it. Or a project advisory board, which could be for a period of time to solve a particular problem, and then it's really thinking through what do you need first. What problems you're trying to solve, and then selecting the right people into that.
Yeah, and as you said, I mean, if you're as a startup part of a program, an accelerator program, something, then you during that could organize your people, the people who support you, in an advisory board, so they would know what to do.
Yeah, and a lot of accelerators, Jens, have pre-selected advisor panels. So it's like an on-demand panel. So if they've got common traits within their cohort, then pre-selecting a panel for a program is a really effective way for that to be done.
And when it comes to the different, so you have the let's take a start. You have the founder of the company, and then you have the first person of the advisory board, the chair. Yeah. And what other roles are there on? You have on the board, or what roles should you have on that board?
Yeah, and the answer to that is it depends. So you need to scope that out first. So what is your advisory board there to do? So if you've got if you have a startup or a scale up, you don't want to focus too far out with what you need, because you've got to get through the valley of death that everybody talks about. So you either got to get through something or to something. You don't want to stay there. So the type of advisors that you have access to, you want them for specific things during that period of time, because by the time you get through it, you probably need different type of advisors because you're going through a different stage. So you don't want a really fixed structure. You want it to be as fluid with you as you possibly can, because we know that 29% of advisory boards are in startup and scale up land, but there's a 47% volatility rate, meaning that they start something and then they actually need something else because they've shifted. So your advisory structure, you don't lock yourself into a really solid structure that you go, well, you actually don't need a full governance board. You need something that's going to move with you. Yeah, and those advisors, depends on what your priorities are, is their backgrounds should meet that individual need that you've got as part of that priority, and select them for that specific purpose. So it could be commercialization strategy, it could be entering new markets, it could be solving a particular technical problem, or creating an opportunity, creating connections. All those things need to be taken into consideration, just as an example.
And how do you, I mean, we have the founder, we have the chairperson, number one. How do you find other people from, how do you find people to get on to your advisory board?
Yeah, so we have one source, right, and it's called the Advisor Concierge. Because if you don't know what you need or who you need, it's a free service. We help you scope that out, create an expression of interest that goes out to the credentialed advisory board community that sign up to a code of ethics. They can apply that, and it goes directly through to you. We don't take percentage fees, rebates, or any kickbacks out of that. And we've curated over 1,000 advisory boards in the last 2 years, and professionals to support businesses when they're trying to access advisors. What's important in that process, though, Jens, is that when we help scope out an advisor role, that goes out to our advisory board community, but that business owner or founder can use that expression of interest to go out to their own advisory community as well. So what that does, it helps them to engage with their existing network in a fresh way that puts them in the control seat. And so you're not just bringing on an advisor because you know them. You've actually chosen them because your business needs, or your organisation needs them, and they've earned the right to be there. So it really brings it out of the emotional relationship that can happen in the startup space, and people being a supporter rather than a quality advisor, into a business relationship that has some really clear parameters around it.
Yeah, I really like that, because you can take part of the advisory board from one network and another part of the advisory board from your existing network, and then you also show them that you're going to work with other professionals, so you're going to be good. How does it often work when it comes to compensation of advisory board members? You mentioned a little bit how often they would meet and so on, but what is normally good practice?
So if we look at the mid-business market, right, to start with, the $1.5 million to $100 million in revenue turnover, generally they will have a chair, that the chair will work on a monthly basis for half a day a month, and the advisory board meetings are generally 4 or 6 times a year, not more than that. If you've got more than that, then they're kind of getting in the way. And potentially, being a shadow director, which is a big issue around good governance. Now, for payment in the mid-market, generally advisory board professionals charge between $2,000 to $3,500 a month. Now, it could be less or it could be more. We know in large organisations it could be double that. In smaller organisations it could be less than that. Everybody has their own rates. I'm just as a point of reflection, very often startups or scale-ups saying we have no money. And so we want people to provide that service as a pro bono service. So that can get problematic in some environments, not always. But if someone's doing it for pro bono for nothing, why are they doing it? And so there's emotional blackmail that can come into that relationship at some point. Or there's expectations of other things. The other part of that discussion is, do you swap equity for advice? And that is something that exists in the market for sure, and you've got to be practical when you have no money about how to get things done. Just be really careful about blending your advisor with your investor, what those expectations are and potential conflicts of interest at some point. At some point, that relationship changes. So are you actually getting really good value for money when you are giving away equity, which could be an expensive strategy long term? One of the trends that we do see, Jens, is when we get startups saying we want an advisory board and we're raising capital, is that we help them with their thinking about pre-selecting their advisory board. That advisory board is placed on the information memorandum. When they raise the funds, the advisory board starts. Now that has a lot of benefits. It has a benefit of the startup really clearly thinking about what their strategic resourcing needs are and understanding their capability gaps. That gives confidence to investors that they've actually thought about that, and also gives them opportunity to really negotiate better with their investors. And then it just creates a better investment strategy long term.
Yeah, and it shows the investor where when the money comes in, it will be put into good use, and you have the advisory board here who is also going to make sure that we work out. Now, and I think the independence is very important because who are you working for, as you said, and also depending on how many owners do you want? If you have an advisory board where you actually have a number of people coming in, then you're going to have a lot of shareholders, and that can be tricky when down the line. So yeah, it's good to plan ahead.
Yeah.
When it comes to all of this information, as we run the Startup Grind events, of goal here is to sort of how do you do this, but also when it comes to accelerators and incubators, and when they come in contact with startups, how can they help their cohorts put this into place?
Yeah, there's a few things, and there's a lot of development in this space as well as we speak. So we have a few different approaches for program managers. One is that we have a scholarship for program managers to complete, which helps them to build ethical frameworks for their way that they engage their external advisors and mentors. So they've got a suite of resources that they can implement on that. We also help a lot of accelerators with setting up an advisor panel. So having an on-demand advisor panel that can support their cohort within their program, and then that's backed up with the advisor concierge process. So the advisor concierge then we can backfill and look at what are the additional needs that those startups need with regards to external advisors. We also run education programs too with accelerators towards the end of their programs to support their cohort with their advice that they need towards the end of the program. When they leave a program, how do they continue with an ecosystem of support around them?
Yeah, so that means that the program manager or the cohort manager or the sort of the incubator accelerator founder, he or she can get the training, and then you can replicate it in level down sort of to each startup. So you can have first an advisory board for the accelerator itself, and then the startups can take benefit of that. Yeah, and then you get good organization.
Yeah.
So when are there any from your experience any startups that you know that has in Australia who has used advisory boards and publicly talk about it?
Yeah, so look, there's many. We've just finished a program with the Australian Queensland government specifically for female founders, and you can see some of those case studies on our website of those founders, and groups like Cerastag in the agriculture, ag tech sector. It's just there's some really good news stories, and it's not always the public stories though. Advisory boards are sometimes a public facing thing, and sometimes it's a very private thing. So some businesses, especially startups or scale-ups, might use it as a bit of a secret strategy to be able to help them to be, especially in hyper-competitive environments, to engage with advisors, but it's actually not a branding exercise. It's really about harnessing those minds around a strategy that could be quite groundbreaking. But yeah, have a look at the Advisor Insights sort of interviews on the site. There's always new ones coming up, and it's startups, large organisations, sector, competitors working together collaboratively to work on specific issues. Today I did an interview with the sporting industry where they came together during COVID, and now it's been so successful that sector is going to continue, competitors that they would see in the market working together to really forward face some of the issues that sector has got in the next few years.
Yeah, and as you said, it's you have it as a secret booster behind you, and as we also talked earlier, like you can get now somebody, since we are using Teams and meetings, you can get somebody who is in the fast-moving consumer goods market and has experience from that, and you can get that person as an advisor. And as you said, it's not a full-time job; it's structured, so there is a limit to the amount of time that person needs to spend, and then he or she can say, "Oh, okay, I can help out." So from sort of a practical expert, what should you do as a startup if you want to get started tomorrow?
Or contact the Advisor Concierge for sure. It is a free service, and that's really important to get clarity of thinking. So the concierge process is, first of all, we have a discussion around the business and what you're trying to do. You could then go away and do your homework and really focus on your key priorities, and we evaluate that together. And generally we take an 18-month view. 12 months is too short, 3 years is way too long in this market. So we take an 18-month view so that you've got enough stretch in the way that you think about your strategy and your goals. And we would evaluate that together and then look at the different options that you might have with your advisory structure. It could be an advisory board of one, could be a pop-up advisory board, could be an advisor panel, could be a project advisory board that's there specifically for a period of days. It could be a 90-day advisory board. And there's other types of models as well that's really evaluated in that process. And we look at your budget and your timing as well as part of that process. So it's generally a 2-meeting approach to be able to get that clarity of thinking to then commit to what you're going to do or not.
And in the follow-up email to this event, we can send out the link so that you can sort of where to go on your website to if you are a mentor or a coach and you say, okay, I like to become certified, or I like to become part of a board, what should your next step be?
Yeah, absolutely. Keep in contact with us. We've got the expressions of interest on the website. We're very careful about selecting the members of the advisory board community. Everyone goes through a selection process. We look at what your motivations are, your key areas of specialisation, the markets that you're wanting to work in, and the markets that you're connected in with. So when you're setting up being an advisory board professional, it's not just about getting a gig. It's not just a job. It's a vocation, and it takes time to build up a quality portfolio when you're sitting in advisory boards, because you might come across an organisation that has a need, but you may not be right for what they need. And you've got to be able to have the ethical approach to say, you need help, but I'm not right for you, right? And so that is such an important part of doing the right thing and being impactful in the work that you do, and having the right frameworks to be able to say, or it may be an advisory board, but you may not need an advisory board. You might need an expert or a consultant, or you might need a board of directors, or you might need legal advice. So an advisory board is not the answer to everything. And so people that sit on advisory boards really need to have that honesty that we look for, in that spirit of wanting to do the right thing.
Coming then back to sort of what is the ideal profile? I mean, or what should an advisory board member ideally have with them?
Well, every advisory board is different. It depends on what challenges they're trying to, or opportunities they're trying to address, is what kind of people. So it's a very diverse group of people within the advisory board community. What is really important, and especially for the chair, is to have a very strong level of commercial acumen. Yeah. So when someone's starting an advisory board for the first time, generally it's a trigger point. They're trying to solve something, or they're trying to do something differently, or really maximise a new opportunity. So their business model, whether it's a startup, scale up, or the business or large organisation, their business model is always being challenged. So the chair needs to be able to understand the consequences of the types of decisions that that business owner is going to make, but also live through. So there's a consequence to everything. And when it's a smaller business, the chair in particular is equally there for the business as it is for the business owner, because the business owner needs to be able to survive their own ambition.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And then the last group of people we talked about, accelerators and investors and incubators. If you're an investor or accelerator, you see, okay, I would like one of the companies I'm working with to have an advisory board. Like, what should they do?
Well, it's interesting. Just before this call, I was speaking with a social impact investment fund out of Europe that are doing. They've got social impact investments around the world, and so they're looking at putting best practice advisory boards over each one of their individual investments. What we're talking through with them, with their particular approach, and I guess it's good timing to be talking about this, is that they implement best practice within their own organisation and then get external advisors in on those advisory boards to maintain that independence. So about 30% of our advisory board professionals are actually C-suite executives implementing advisory boards within their own ecosystems. So that is a great way to be able to maintain and manage the culture of their own best practice advisory boards. And for investor groups, this is a really important thing around investor confidence. not only the funds, but how the funds are being deployed. And the whole stakeholder economy that we all live in now, that communication through and transparency with the way that those advisory boards work, and an adaptation of best practice as well, just increases confidence and trust in those relationships when there's so many relationships involved.
Yeah, and it's a good way to help somebody by helping them with a group of people who can support them. So when you started this project, you looked and you saw that there is no advisory board, organization around the world. Is there any country who has come further with advisory board implementation?
So no, we're still the only professional body in the world doing this, and I take that really seriously, the role that we play in that. Sometimes I wonder, how come we're the only ones doing it? I'm very happy that we're the only ones doing it, but it's also been years of work and research and understanding the best practice that is adaptable to multiple environments. So that's not easy to replicate, but it's important with the growth of the sector at 52% in less than 2 years, that we support as many organisations doing it, because they're using it in ways that have never been used before. And with governance boards getting smaller worldwide, the Financial Times reported in August last year that governance boards are shrinking, that advisory boards have got a new role to play to put the critical thinking in place before decisions are being made.
Yeah, and to me, it makes perfect sense to have an advisory board to your startup or to your company, and it's organized. From a personal reflection, sometimes you can get questions about a governance board. I mean, the owner's board, but that's if you have good ideas and you want to help, an advisory board seems like a very good way to get started, and also to bring in knowledge, not consultants, knowledge that you can discuss with people who will give you straight feedback, and add on new knowledge to your existing company.
And it's agile, right? And so you're not stuck with a system that you can't change. And some people don't understand the difference between an advisory board and a governance board. So if I might just put some frameworks around that, a governance board is a very clear decision-making model, and it's binding. It's binding on the directors, where they're personally liable and can go to jail for the decisions that are made or not made. And it's also binding on the business itself to implement on those decisions. An advisory board is not there to make decisions. They are problem solving, and the decision stays with the business owner, which is why I loved it, because I got the support, but I didn't lose control of the asset that I was building.
And I guess also in regards, as you said, when you cross that valley of death as a startup, you can rotate members on an advisory board. Rotating members on a governance board, yes, doable, but it's much more complicated, because it's part of the ownership of the company. So it's nothing that you just do in a sort of quickly. Louise, it's been great. I think advisory boards is so valuable as a puzzle piece, a complement or a part of growing a startup, and also a great way of getting the best out of your advisors. And as you said, about returning to the first part about good meetings, how do you create good meetings? People want to listen and engage and learn, so they can give feedback.
It can change your life. It did for me. But I'm the most biased person in the market around advisory boards. But it is. I am eternally grateful for what it's done for me.
So we will send out the contact details to you and how to get started with the concierge service to sort of ask those questions. Louise, big thank you for being part of Startup Grind and helping next generation of startups.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thanks, James.
Thank you. Thank you. And for everybody else, looking forward to see you at the next Startup Grind event. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.